Hi YouTube. Today's video is going to be a presentation on the Colt Python. Since we had talked about the Colt Official Police previously, I thought it would be a good idea to just keep going down the line of Colt revolvers. Now this particular model, this is a 1966 Colt Python. I got this probably 2 or 3 years ago. I did have another Colt Python. That model was a 1971, but I ended up selling that.
Oh, no, no.
Now, I want to make it clear that we are not doing a comparison. I know that Colt has released their 2020 new revolver lines. I'm talking more of the vintage, the old Colt Python, old Trooper, old Cobra Detective Special. I do have some opinions on the new Colt revolver line, but I'll just keep that for a separate video. So the old model Colt Python was made from 1955 to about 1999 technically. After 1999, Colt did make more Pythons, but it was a new line, an exclusive line called the Colt Python Elite. Other than stamping the word Elite on the gun, there really wasn't that much of a difference. So all in all, the Colt Python ended production in 2005. That was the point where you couldn't even send your old Pythons in to be retimed. Pythons were available in 2, 4, 6, and 8-inch barrels. It was possible to get it in 3-inch. That's incredibly difficult to find, and when you do find them, they are even more ridiculously overpriced. Now, this Colt Python was made in 1966, and that was also the year that Colt stopped doing, or maybe the year after, they stopped doing the hollow underlug. So from 1955 to 1966, Colt actually drilled out the underlug of the barrel, I presume to save weight and to make the gun lighter, but after 1966, they decided to leave it, acting as a sort of weight stability. Now the Colt Trooper, in terms of frame size, is very similar to the Colt Trooper, which I do have. This is I like to call it a late model Colt Trooper, and by that I mean that the first gen Colt Troopers, or the first Colt Troopers, they are supposed to be an E-frame, and an E-frame has the firing pin mounted on the hammer, but this one has it mounted in the frame inside. So you'll hear them say that the Colt Trooper was an E-frame. That's only true if you have a firing pin on the hammer. If you don't, then I would just call it kind of a late frame Colt Trooper, and this is clearly what we would call an I-frame, which means that the firing pin is on the inside of the gun. Now, if you remember from the Colt Official Police, that one had a firing pin on the hammer here. And so that was Colt's designation for the E and the I frames, was that the E frame had the firing pin on the hammer, and the I frame had the firing pin in the mounted inside the frame. Now, as far as I can tell, the Colt Python was available in royal blue and bright nickel, I think maybe immediately from 1955 up to 1982, possibly 83, 84. Then you began to see these guns come out in a matte stainless or a bright stainless steel finish. Now, what you'll see with Smith & Wesson is that there are generational changes. You'll see, Smith Model 10-7, -8, -9. That's usually a designation change. Some people call it generations. And I think we talked about that as well with the Official Police, that the early generation Official Police had that sort of checkered cylinder release, checkered hammer, checkered trigger. And then the ones after that were more different. I don't know what the differences were, but basically it kind of tells you that it's an early model or a late model. Now the Colt Python mechanically does not have any generational differences except for maybe the grips. So the first gen grips are completely fully checkered type of grip. The second grip, which is this one here, is kind of like a half moon grip here on both sides. And then of course the third type was kind of just cut off, straight cut off, and I actually like those. Those are actually the best. Those were on my 1971 Python that I sold. I like those grips the best, actually. I'm not a fan of these second gen grips. It just feels really odd to me. So I don't know if by the third generation, Colt had made the grips not have as strong of a texture so that it was a little bit smooth. And then here it's, it's not as smooth, so it doesn't feel as good. And I can only imagine what the first gen grip would have been like. Now, unfortunately, as you can expect with such a high prized item, people do tend to sell or resell what somebody might say a fake Colt Python, fake in quotes, in the sense that it's not vintage. They might pretend that it's vintage when it's not, or if it's been reworked, redone, of course, reblued. Um, so if you're considering a Colt Python, but you don't want one that you want to shoot, but you want one to keep forever, then of course you want to authenticate that vintage. There are a couple ways to know, to check. Not that it's you know, complete guide, but just what I kind of used to before I bought my 1966 one. First of all, if you're gonna get it with a box, I can't imagine how difficult that would be to authenticate because it's easy to print out fake boxes now and fake paperwork. So honestly, if you want to do that, that's a whole different animal. um, but in terms of the gun itself, there's a couple things you can do. The first thing is that Colt actually has a free. You can type in the serial number of the firearm, and it will tell you the year that the gun was made. And of course, that helps us because if you get a 1966 Python, but it has a third gen grip, then at least you know the grips are not authentic to it, right? Or at least not original to it to a degree. Um, Same thing if you got a year 2000 Python and it has Gen 1 grips from 1955 to I think they stopped putting it on 1961. Again, you know it doesn't match type of thing. Now, in terms of a reblue, because these guns, you could have gotten them reblued back then. Um, the one thing that you should look for is the markings or the stampings. Typically, if someone does work, refinish work, um, if they're a little bit too excited, it's very easy to wash out those symbols, to polish it too far deep, and so it doesn't have it's not as clear and not as easy to see. Now that also goes with kind of like the sharp corners of the python, kind of like the front part. If it's rounded out, then that's another sign that it's probably been refinished or reblued. And another thing to check is the front of the cylinder release. Um, it was pretty well known that actually didn't get the royal blue finish, which is interesting. The whole gun got royal blue finished, but it seemed that Colt kind of just left the front of the cylinder release um, unblued. So if you buy one, if you're looking at one and you see that it's reblued, then it definitely wasn't done at factory. Now I actually have shot this gun before. It would have been maybe like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Um, and I standardized it to 158 grain Federal American Eagle because that ammo hits perfectly with my carry gun. It's my model 10-7 here. And since the Python is already, it's already got adjustable sights and it's not a fighting gun, it's a fun gun, then I just figured I'll just sight it for a 158 grain 38 special. Now, of course, you're going to say, but it's made for 357. Why wouldn't you sight it for 357? Well, the Colt Python originally was meant to be a 38 special target competition revolver. It was meant to be a super premium 38 special revolver. So now you say, well, if that's the case, then why did Colt chamber it for 357? Well, the reason is that 357 was getting a lot of popularity in that time. Um, most officers of the law were using kind of like the snub nose, Cobra, Detective Special, Chief Special. And the 38 Special is a good round if you use it in the way that it was tested, which was with a 4-inch barrel. But of course, when you go from a shorter barrel, you lose a lot of velocity, you lose a lot of power. So the concern was that, well, 38 Special is not strong enough, in a snub nose. And so they thought, well, if we make a new round, which is the 357, it'll have more velocity. And it did. It does. and they used 158 grain. But at that time, they came out with 125 grain, so the bullet's a lot lighter, and it's going a lot faster with a lot more velocity. And the cops loved it, except, except, um, there were issues in regards to Smith and Wesson's Model 19, which was chambered in 357, but after shooting a lot of the 125 grains, what I like to call lightning rounds, it actually cracked the forcing cone, which is very dangerous, of course. And I think even Smith and Wesson made the Model 19 with the understanding that the gun would be shot mostly with 38, but when it was time for fighting, then it would be chambered with 357. And the Colt Python also had some trouble with the 125 grain because the Colt Python's timing is very meticulous. Most of the work is done by the hand, the hand inside the frame of the gun, and I guess you could say it's fragile, but it's mostly for high accuracy, right? So let me give you an example. When the gun is resting, right, you hear that? It moves, right? And that's normal with any gun, right? Like here's let's do the Model 29, right? You hear it. It's not locked up, right? Now, when a gun is in full lockup, that means after the trigger is pulled, right? So here, if I pull the trigger, right, then this is full lockup position. It doesn't move at all. You don't hear anything, right? But most other guns, even in full lockup, you can still hear something. You can still move. And so that was kind of the presumption that, the Colt Python vault bank lockup was responsible for its accuracy. And it really is. It really is. When the trigger is pulled, right, on a revolver, the cylinder is locked into place already. Okay? But what the Colt's doing, instead, what they're doing is the gun isn't exactly locked up yet. It hasn't fallen into the cylinder stop yet. But when you pull the trigger, then that's when the cylinder is locked into place. And of course, that is what people usually associate with Colt's high degree of accuracy. As you can imagine, a steady diet of the lightning rounds, as I like to call them, it did have a tendency to make the Python go out of time. When a revolver is out of time, what that means is it's not in full lockup position, right? So when the cylinder stop is in place and it keeps the cylinder in place, it's safe, right? It's safe because everything's in order. But if a gun is out of time, there are many things that can happen. The best thing that can happen is that nothing happens. That would be the safest thing. But unfortunately, things can happen where the gun goes off, but it's not aligned. Obviously, you're going to get, a spray of lead and gases. You can hurt yourself. And so the Colt Python's meticulous timing was victim to that, especially because everyone was using 125 grain. That's what everybody wanted to use. That's the cops are using it. Works for them. I want to do it too. So of course, a lot of people's Colt Pythons were going out of time. And remember, this gun was made for 38 special. So chambering it to match the excitement of the 357, when you need more research to make sure, hey, can this gun handle 357? Of course, is going to lead to the timing issues that the Python have. And of course, people will associate that it's not a good design. Again, keep in mind it was made for 38, and so to catch on the 357 bandwagon, they just rechambered it. And when the lightning rounds came out, it really didn't help its case at all. In fact, I only shoot 38 special through this gun, the 158, not the lightning rounds. All right, well, that's all I have to say for the Colt Python. It is one of my favorite guns. Again, I can't shoot it because you can't find fair priced ammo, but it's an iconic thing. I can't argue with that. I will say the double action trigger was not as nice as the 1971 Python that I had. That one's trigger was a lot better, but I've gotten used to this one. It's a lot heavier and it's not as crisp. Yeah, it's just not yeah, it's not as nice as the 1971. The 1971 was really nice. Um, I don't know why I sold that. Well, anyways, I hope this video was interesting for you guys. Other than that, like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.